Hello everybody and welcome to episode 48 of my Guild Wars 2 series. Today we are taking a break from doing map completion and the personal story, and we are going to be doing a dungeon. And the first dungeon that we will be doing is Ascalonian Catacombs, and right at the start of this episode here I'm going to go ahead and go into LFG and try to get a group started. And I pinged my guild in a moment, and I also pinged my Discord, and I got somebody from my guild to join as well, and then I got a few people from LFG to join as well. But it does take a few minutes for us to be able to get started with this dungeon, where dungeons are like in-game content for the original Guild Wars 2, and people still run them a lot. I instantly got 2 people to join this dungeon group right here. But it is a little bit challenging because not a lot of people run them. A lot of people are kind of like just finished with running all of them. And a lot of people are kind of newer to this game and to doing dungeons, which kind of makes sometimes where you run dungeons, it becomes a little bit more difficult. Where, for example, today in this group, I'm mostly just going to skip over this, but basically I put up my LFG group, and then somebody else had an LFG group, and then they merged with my group, and they didn't realize that I was going for story mode and they were going for exploration mode. So then that caused a little bit of an issue because I was here to do story mode, one of them was here to do exploration mode, and I didn't realize that they merged at first because the game doesn't tell you that they merged. And then we kind of had this whole situation where we had to like reform a little bit. But after that fiasco, we got everything situated and we started with running this dungeon, Ascalonian Catacombs, which is the first dungeon in the game where you can access the story mode version of the dungeon at level 30 and the exploration mode at level 35, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And us as a level 44 necromancer, we are going to go ahead and have a good time here as we experience the first dungeon in the Guild Wars 2 story. And as we enter the dungeon for the first time, we have a cutscene from Rytlock Brimstone basically cluing us in on what is happening here.
You're not the reinforcements I expected, but you'll do. That fool Norn Air has stirred up the ghosts down here. Let me brief you. This place has a history, and I don't want your ignorance getting us killed. This was originally Char land. The humans pushed us out and built Ascalon on top of it. Over 200 years ago, we took our land back. The human king Adalbern watched his soldiers panic as we breached the city gates. Facing certain defeat, the doomed king refused to surrender.
Retreat? Retreat is not an option!
Adalbern smashed his ancient blade Magder and cursed Ascalon.
You will not abandon me!
The blast incinerated the attacking legions and turned the defending humans into vengeful spirits.
We will never surrender! Never!
The ghosts see the living as invaders. They show no mercy and no weariness, only blind hatred. Adalbern's hatred. And now, Air's gone right into the dead king's lair. What a mess. We're going after her. She's causing trouble, and I don't want anyone dying because of her foolishness.
And after the cutscene, we can go ahead and get started with running the dungeon here. So I just talked to Rytlock and we can get started. And basically, we are trying to find Heirs to Galkin because she ran into the Ascalonian Catacombs looking for something. And we are basically trying to rescue her because we don't want her to, 1, die to all the ghosts down here. And 2, we don't want her to rile up the ghosts and send them back up to the surface because the Char are already dealing with a lot of ghosts on the surface and they don't need to deal with anymore.
Good, you're ready. The sooner we can find that fool Norn, the sooner we can quit this foul place.
As we progress through the dungeon, there are a lot of things that people of other MMOs will kind of just recognize from the experience of doing dungeons, where there are some traps and there are some bosses and there's a bunch of trash mobs and all that stuff. So starting off right here, we kind of just have a little bit of kind of a puzzle. It's more like an RNG based puzzle where we just have to open up all the coffins around here, trying to find the boss of this first area, which killing the boss will open the gate for us. So we are just going to go ahead and basically just work as a group to deal damage to all these mobs around here. We can fight the spider hatchlings right here, but there are also these Ascalonian ghosts that are spawning, and if you notice around their icon, the next time that we fight one of them, they have a very special like border around them, where we are used to fighting like veterans and champions in the open world, where veterans have like a golden ring around them and champions have like a golden ring with like swords and stuff. But in dungeons and in some other select areas of Guild Wars 2, we can actually fight elite mobs like this Mesmer right here, which has a silver ring around it. And basically, it's like a level of difficulty for a mob between veteran and champion that, again, we mostly only see in dungeons, and sometimes it's used in like other areas as well. But I think it's kind of something really cool with like the silver ring around it, because it really differentiates it from like other mobs in the game, where like this feels like a dungeon because we are fighting like these dungeon mobs, and now we are fighting this boss here as well. Which, when it comes to like the gameplay of dungeons, it's basically the exact same thing as the open world, but we are doing it with a group of 5 people, where it's ourselves and 4 other people, and we basically have like the opportunity to work together as a group to be able to go do things, which is nice because when we are in the open world, sometimes we have people around us, but sometimes we're alone. But when we have like a dedicated group of people with us, we have the opportunity to kind of like build a more like cohesive team composition and like work together to get like on like a basic level some like combinations and stuff. And then when we look at it at a higher level, we can really like design our builds around working together as a team, where in dungeons, as we see as we are fighting all of these mobs right now, these mobs really blow up super fast, where in the modern day of Guild Wars 2, dungeons are super easy. And I think I've actually soloed Ascalonian Catacombs story mode before on like my main character. It's a really easy dungeon. Of course, for newer people coming into the game, it's obviously a little bit harder because you're like new to the game and you don't like understand all the skills and stuff, and like that's completely okay, but obviously things are going to be a little bit harder until you kind of understand things better. But beyond that, there's also kind of like the idea of power creep, where we have like the second boss right here, where back in the day, the skills that we did, the damage that we dealt, and the healing we do to ourselves is like a little bit weaker, where like nowadays, as there's been a lot of balance changes and updates, we're just stronger as characters nowadays, where that boss that we just killed was blown up instantly, and it took a little bit longer back in the day in order to kill them. But of course, Ascalonian Catacombs story has always been a very easy story to do. Here we can do a fun thing where we put a boulder on the pressure plate.
Put something heavy on the pressure plate.
But dungeons are like the first pieces of instance content that we see in Guild Wars 2, and it wasn't until the first expansion where we started seeing the stuff that's like a little bit more difficult and a little bit more refined, I guess, from the original 2012 dungeons. Of course, dungeons during vanilla got updates, and there was even one dungeon path that got replaced with a brand new one, which we'll talk about later. But in the modern day, starting with like the first expansion, where they really went hard on like certain philosophies of game design and stuff like that, we start seeing some more kind of advanced tactics arise from the Guild Wars 2 community, and then we also see certain roles kind of coming into play. Where back in 2012, Guild Wars 2 really marketed itself on this idea that there is no holy trinity, where we have 5 people in our group right now, where let's go ahead and check out this cutscene and then we will talk more about this.
Rytlock, what are you doing here?
I came to stop you from inciting a full-scale ghost rampage. Why are you here?
I'm looking for King Adalbern's legendary weapon, the sword called Magdir.
Magdir? Magdir was destroyed when the Sorcerer King set off the foe fire.
I think it survived. I believe the sword will be found at the top of these stairs.
You are following a foolish human legend.
You of all people should know the power of legends. You bear Magdir's twin, Sohathan. It was Rurik's sword.
What if I do? Adalbern's sword is no more, just like his nation.
Then let us go up the stairs and see for ourselves.
As I was saying, In other MMORPGs, you have like a team of 5 people where you have a tank, a healer, and 3 DPS, and this is kind of considered like the holy trinity where these players work together, and basically you have the tank that is pulling all the aggro of the mobs and basically taking all the damage and trying to like defend everyone else on the team, where the healer is trying to make sure that everyone, especially the tank, is kept alive, and then the DPS, damage per second players, are basically just trying to deal as much damage or as much damage as they are able to any of the bosses or mobs they're fighting. But now we have a really cool moment in this dungeon where we are going to see King Adalburn show up right here, who is the last king of Ascalon, and let's go ahead and chat.
Rytlock, the broken sword. It's the twin to your own.
Worry more about the sword's master. Look there.
I sense Sahothan's presence. Rurik, my son, you've returned!
Your son is dead. So is your kingdom. Leave us.
Foul creature, your entire race will pay. Even now, my champions prepare to invade the surface. You will fall before the might of Master Ranger Nente, deadly Kasha Blackblood, and the lovers Rolina and Vassar. We'll destroy you as you destroyed us!
You frighten no one with your meaningless threats. We've killed you before. We'll do it again.
Now you've angered them.
They were already angry. Now we must find his champions and silence them.
But as we progress forward, we have the Holy Trinity and other MMORPGs. Guild Wars 2 really tried to just like steer away from that idea of a Holy Trinity, and back in the day pretty much everyone was DPS, but in like dungeon groups it was kind of like 4 DPS and then like 1 supporty player, where it was kind of like a mesmer or an elementalist that would support like basically 4 warriors. Was kind of like the meta back in the day. But nowadays, the balance and like the philosophies and the design of Guild Wars 2 have really changed from what dungeons were kind of designed around. But we will talk more about instance content and kind of like what these design philosophies and whatnot basically mean for like the modern day Guild Wars 2 player doing like modern day like instance content.
Your desire to destroy still unsatisfied, beast. Burning Ascalon not enough for you?
As long as you stalk us, we'll fight you tooth and claw.
By Melandru's will, I will rend you from this world, Char.
Where of course we have this boss right here that we just blew up super fast, and because we are blowing up these bosses, we aren't really doing any mechanics against these bosses, where like this boss kind of like teleports around and then you have to like jump around after him in order to fight him, but he just stayed in the middle the whole time because we just blew him up. And we'll see that with like pretty much all like the major bosses of this dungeon, where we've already fought a couple of like minor bosses. That was like our like first big boss that we fought. And I think on one hand that is kind of disappointing, where like dungeons are super easy, and I can just imagine what like making a perfect team composition will do in like a dungeon, where I've personally never done that before because I'm not super interested in doing that. Also right here we have the like remains of Magdair, the shattered sword, which was King Adalburn's sword that he used in order to basically cause the full fire, and he incinerated a ton of char that were attacking Ascalon City. And then he turned all the humans around Ascalon into ghosts with like the magical spell that he cast using that sword, which that sword itself is pretty cool because it is one of 2 swords. The other is Sahothan, which was Prince Rurik's sword, who is King Adalburn's son, and it is now Rytlock Brimstone's sword because he found it somehow and it's now in his possession, and we don't really know why he has that sword, but of course he does. And we have Magdair here, which is the twin sword of Sahothin, and it was actually given by the gods in Aral in the Kingdom of Or to Ascalon to basically try to like keep the peace between like the nations and whatnot. And then those two swords and then the crown are super important. But here we have Kasha that we can go ahead and speak with.
Why are you here? This is the land of ghosts.
Stand down, Spectre. We seek only to protect the living.
Don't chat with her, heir. Dispatch her!
Ghosts of Ascalon, rise up and defend me!
Wish, Kasha, and Master Ranger Ninti that we just fought are two super cool characters because they were characters in the original Guild Wars where Kasha was a necromancer trainer, I believe, and then Master Ranger Ninti was a ranger trainer, and they basically like taught people in pre-Syrian Ascalon and then in post-Syrian Ascalon, I believe, how to do their different skills on their profession and whatnot and all that stuff. And that is something that we see throughout the Ascalonian Catacombs as well as all of Ascalon, where we have these really cool lore characters and like story characters from the original game, and they are here in Guild Wars 2, but of course they're ghosts because of what Adalbern did with Magdair. And then the Ascalonian Catacombs itself is also really cool because it was an area that we could explore in pre-Syrian Ascalon, which is basically, to summarize it, like the tutorial for the original Guild Wars, for the original campaign. And now it is the first dungeon that we get to experience in Guild Wars 2, which is kind of cool that there's a little bit of like a similarity between pre-Syrian Ascalon and the Catacombs there being like the first part of Guild Wars 1 that you explore, and then here in Guild Wars 2 as we kind of do some of the instance content is like one of the first things that we explore. And of course we have these two bosses right here that we fight at the same time, who are also important characters from Guild Wars 1, who also have a mechanic that back in the day you kind of had to deal with, where you had to split them apart because they become more powerful the closer they are. But nowadays you don't really have to do that. You can just blow them up like we just did.
Perfect chance to deal with him.
And now we are going to go ahead and do a special thing where we're just going to waypoint in order to get to the final boss a little bit faster, which when we look at kind of like doing dungeons in Guild Wars 2, there are a lot of tricks that people do in order to speed up dungeons, and we're mostly just trying to go through it casually, but of course the other people in this group kind of want to rush through it a little bit, which is a little unfortunate for me because I was kind of wanting to take my time. But I think for the most part I got everything that I wanted to share from this dungeon, and of course I recorded this dungeon before I talked over it. So I am watching my playthrough of this dungeon right now and talking over it, and then I'm editing the two together. So if you notice anything weird, that is why. And let's go ahead and talk to Adalbern.
What have you done?
Your champions are gone, Ghost. Just like your son and your kingdom.
I will have my vengeance. Join me in death.
And now we can fight King Adalbern, the ghost of King Adalbern, who is the final boss of this dungeon. And we see under his name he has a really cool descriptor of Summons Full Fire, which is really fun. But just like all the other bosses and all the other mobs in this dungeon, this final fight is super easy, and we can just blow him up, and we can basically take care of the threat of King Adalbern, the ghost, right now. And of course he will rematerialize later, but for now he is defeated.
You've defeated me, but what have you gained? Much deadlier things stir beneath us. They'll consume you all.
Magdair is shattered, but I know a blacksmith who can mend these pieces.
Did you really think that if you got me a sword, you'd earn forgiveness?
For you, the sword would be for Logan.
What? Why would you risk our lives, my life, for that coward?
I thought it would heal old wounds. It would remind you.
Remind me of what? Betrayal? Ah, you've become a sentimental old woman. We're finished here.
Why does Rytlock hate Logan?
Mistakes from a lifetime ago. Best forgotten. Rytlock's right. I've gotten too sentimental. Too weak.
And here we have a little bit of a twist and drop for this dungeon.
A long time ago, I led us into a disaster. He blames me. They all do. The thing is, they may be right.
Where Air came into the dungeon basically trying to get Magdair so that she could reforge it and give it to Logan, so Rytlock would have Hothin and then Logan would have Magdair, and they would basically together have like the two swords, and it would hopefully kind of like mend the two bonds between them. And that is a storyline that we can talk a little bit more about in the future. But as far as this dungeon goes, we have just completed the first dungeon in the game. It was pretty fast, and this is kind of a pretty short episode. And I had a lot of fun running through this dungeon and kind of experiencing all of this again, because it's been a little bit since I've done the story mode version of Ascalonian Catacombs. But of course, we got all of our rewards and all of our achievements and stuff for that. And now that we have completed story mode, we have now unlocked explorable mode, which is not something that I'm going to explore right this moment, but I just want to talk about it a little bit. Where story mode is pretty easy and is kind of like designed to allow people to experience the story of this area and of this dungeon, where explorable mode is a little bit more challenging but more rewarding, and it's kind of what most people do in dungeons, where a lot of people would do story mode once just to unlock explorable mode. And of course, when you're in a group, you just need one person in the group that has explorable mode unlocked in order to enter that mode. But if all 5 people have never done story mode, then that's a little bit of a challenge. And of course, that unlock is actually connected to the character and not the account. So I just completed this on our necromancer here. If I were to come here on like my guardian, for example, it would be a little bit of a rough experience because I can't enter explorable mode on that character. I can only do it on this necromancer character unless I have a friend in my group that has done the story mode version. But with the explorable mode version of the Ascalonian Catacombs, just like all the other dungeons in the game, there is actually more story going on, and it's a little bit more of like a smaller story and like a more concentrated story, where if I am to just kind of like talk a little bit about it right now, is that there are these mysterious monsters that come from like deep underground underneath Ascalon called gravelings, and basically the Ascalonians like way back in the day, and now the ghosts now basically kind of ward them off and like keep them held back. And now with King Adelburn defeated and all the ghosts down there defeated, there are of course still a few more Ascalonian ghosts around there that we will be dealing with in the explorable mode version of the dungeon. But there are basically not enough to hold back the gravelings, and they are basically trying to like breach into the surface world and cause mayhem or whatever, try to, grow their population or whatever, and we have to fight them back while we help the Priory kind of explore the Ascalonian Catacombs and all that stuff. So it's like a pretty basic, where all the final bosses are like big gravelings that we have to fight, and then there are a few smaller stories that we could deal with there, of course. And I think the explorable mode of dungeons are fun, and we will most likely experience them in the future as I get around to doing that, as I do everything else in Guild Wars 2 in this Let's Play series. But as far as doing the story mode version of Ascalonian Catacombs goes, that's everything that I was wanting to do here. And I actually noticed / remembered that the third dungeon in the game unlocks at level 50, and this is currently our highest level character, I believe, at level 45. And when we do the second dungeon in the game, we probably won't be there, and I think it just makes more sense that we kind of like wait to do the third dungeon a little bit. Where I mentioned that I would be doing the first 3 dungeons in last episode, where I think I'm just going to do the first 2 dungeons for now, and then we will return to doing like the story and stuff like that, and then we might return to doing some of the other dungeons again, like the third one and then the fourth one, and then maybe we'll take a break again after that, in my quest to basically explore all of the story and all the content that we can explore in Guild Wars 2 here. But as you can see right now, after the Ascalonian Catacombs, I just went and did a little bit of map completion in order to basically get a little bit of footage so I can talk about what I just talked about here. And beyond all of that, I have done everything that I wanted to do in this episode with exploring the Ascalonian Catacombs. And I'm also going to turn this footage into a lore and story video as well, that I don't believe that is going to have any major spoilers for any other parts of the game, unlike other lore and story videos that I put out. So if you're interested in watching that, feel free to watch those. And if you don't care about spoilers, go ahead and watch all my other ones as well. But as far as this episode goes, I am going to go ahead and call it good here. And I hope you all are taking good care of yourselves. Remember to drink some water, check your posture, and subscribe. And I'll see you next time in the world of Tyria. Goodbye.